Welcome everyone to the school board meeting of June 22nd. I would ask and everyone would rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much for that. So we have a consent agenda this evening, which consists of our minutes from our June 7th regular meeting, vouchers and payroll, personnel report, surplus report, contracts, and field trip approvals. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved. Is there a second? I'll second. Thank you, Julie. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have public comment. And this evening I have four, folks who have pre-registered for public comment this evening. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Kim is typically the timekeeper, and she's hustling to get her timekeeping device. So we have 2 folks in person and 2 folks who are commenting remotely. We'd ask that you state your name and your address, and please be respectful of the time. If you have written your comments and you don't get to finish in the 3 minutes allotted, we welcome you to email those comments to the board. We will read them in their entirety. Looks like Kim is back. So our first person is Deborah Ciarloa. And pardon me if I butchered that.
Is that all? The little button in the back. Put on.
Justine.
Okay.
My name is Deborah Ciarlo, and I have had the unique privilege and blessing of holding 2 professional licensures, which, which at times, such as now, intersect in such a way that it compels me to share with you my observations with urgency. I have recently retired from 41 years serving our community as a licensed speech therapist in private practice. 14 years ago, I began serving our community as a licensed mental health counselor in private practice. Putting aside all religious and political viewpoints, I want to appeal to your ability to critically think. Children have a very difficult task of finding out who they are and what their unique place is in this world. Among many factors, receiving and giving social feedback with peers and adults is a very important part of this process. If this give and take feedback does not occur because of having to wear a mask, as well as others wearing masks, it prevents the child from receiving the very basic message that they are okay, the most basic of relational, connected, and social messages. I am sure most of you have been in a grocery store and have reflexively smiled at someone wearing a mask and realized they couldn't tell you were wearing a mask. I mean, they were smiling because you were wearing a mask, and you didn't know if they were smiling back because they were wearing a mask. So you feel silly and maybe a little embarrassed and continue shopping without connecting, and it has the same effect, decreased social interaction with others. As a speech therapist, I worked with many children who lack social skills for many different reasons, autism, learning disorders, etc. Using your ability to critically think, you can easily surmise that social skill development is even more gravely negatively impacted with such children because of having to wear a mask. This fact has led to a catastrophic surge in anxiety, especially social anxiety in children. And every counselor I've talked to in and outside of our community, Jeez Louise. Okay, that's scary. I urge you to consider the health, social, emotional, and mental negative ramifications of making children wear masks today. Isn't it time we say enough is enough? We need to come to our senses and allow children to be themselves and to get on with the markedly difficult task of learning to socialize finding out through a simple smile that they are acceptable and that they belong. If we allow them the normalcy of seeing the faces of others, accepting them, they will receive the most basic of human connected messages that they are okay, thus staving off isolation and social anxiety. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Terry Fike.
Couldn't agree more. I'm Terry Fike. I live in Kashmir, but I also teach construction trades over at the Tech Center. I have some pretty serious concerns about the direction of our strategic plan, particularly the strategic plan team, and some of the verbiage that's being used and some of the ambiguity of some of the verbiage. I listened through the May Zoom meeting where the team says we really can't even define what we're talking about when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. We're working on defining that. That's confusing to me because they also said that the DEI is just all through the strategic plan and every aspect of it. What is all through the strategic plan? We can't even define what we're talking about. The team also were saying that we're getting some negative feedback because people just don't understand what we're talking about. There doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity to help us understand what you're talking about. And if there is an undertone of, well, just trust us. That's really hard to do. My trust in experts is really waning. Whenever I hear the term equity that was not defined by the team, and I don't know if it has been, my understanding is that the path to equity is paved in tyranny. That's historically accurate. So if we're coming up with a new definition of what equity is about, well, I'd like to hear it. And how has our definition changed from historically? Also, it was said that our definition is going to be different than Eastmont's. It's going to be different from that, different from that. So are we just making stuff up when we're talking about these key concepts? It kind of sounds like we are. And yet that's the driving force behind our strategic plan. And now, of all the issues we face as a district, we are making a position for a vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to me, that's right down the road of tyranny. Because what? We're not getting it right. Because also in that conference, it was stated that being diverse is not the same as diversity. What does that mean? My summer school class right now, I have 5 Hispanics, 1 Black, 4 whites. One of those guys is special needs kid. 2 of my guys are from the group home at Canyon View. They're on parole and they're in my class. Now, am I not diverse or am I only diverse? Is that not diversity? So anyway, this is leading me down this path of a lot of suspicion and not a lot of confidence about where we're going with this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Terry. Next, we have a remote commenter, Donnie Guerrero. Not here. Okay. Then we have Brian Hurley, also remote.
Oh, Donnie's not here yet. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I didn't quite hear that clearly. Is it my turn?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Brian Hurling. I live in Malaga, and I'm here speaking. I'm a teacher in the Wenatchee School District, but I'm speaking as a parent and just as a member of the community. I know that right now we're caught between 2 different political winds that are certainly stirring up a tempest, coming from both sides, and certainly trying to blow us into each other and to cause a lot of strife and conflict. And I know that that's really difficult to listen to the, talking heads from both sides of the spectrum and hear them try to push us in the direction that they think will make our country better. In reality, we only have each other, and we have to listen to each other and try to work the best that we can to make sure that we're serving everyone. Terry, I'm sure that you help all your students equally, and you're equitable in all your teaching. And I think that that is a great example of equity. That is people trying to just make sure that your students are taken care of. I know that there's a lot of redefining of words, and that certainly is, does need to be defined, and there needs to be some discussion about that. But I am reminded that, if you would, to touch on a little bit of cultural heritage, in the Bible, there was talk while they were wandering in the desert, and God sent manna from heaven, and everybody got what they needed. If you took too much, somehow it just went to rot. And if you didn't take enough, somehow it was enough to go by. And I think that in that idea of equity, where we're trying to make sure that everyone has enough to succeed and to get things done the way that they need to, that's a pretty good example of what equity will look like for us as we move forward. We're just trying to make sure that our students have the tools and the capabilities and the skills that they need to succeed after they leave us. And that's what we're looking for. I don't think it has to be anything more highfalutin than that. It's just trying to help people, everyone, where they're at. And I also see in the school district that there's a lot of, I see in the community that there's a lot of fear that the school district will be indoctrinating people, but I don't see that in my conversations with fellow teachers and even with, listening to these school board meetings. We're trying to represent all of us together, and that is a difficult task, but I've seen a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussion, and a lot of care for people on both ends of the political spectrum. And I think that, as far as I've seen, will be the way that we continue to move forward. And I just want us to, again, as a community, please, I urge calm. This is not a simple time that we're going through, but I think that we need to listen to each other, try not to overreact, try not to get pushed around by people who have what sounds like good words, but really all they're trying to do is just hype people up to get, clicks, likes, subscribes, and whatever. I also, on a slightly related note, would like to urge some discussion in the future related to some of the inclusion issues, and to make sure that the school board members are not just reading the conclusions that are listed in the research, but also looking at the data that's there. Because in some of my readings, I have certainly found that some of the data was left out of the conclusion statements, and they did not fully represent all of the information that they gathered while they were conducting their research. And I think that does bear that we do have to do some due diligence and really make sure that we're not just listening again to talking heads that are telling us what they want us to think, but rather that we're really looking at the full research and the body of research that was presented.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a great night.
So did Donnie Guerrero ever appear? Okay, and we've not received any messages from him, Kim, saying he's having trouble?
Laura, while we're waiting, may I make a quick response to the masks? Just so we're on the same page around students wearing masks.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, the Department of Health sets those guidelines around the masks. The board, the superintendent, in no district has the authority to remove that mandate. That is the Department of Health. That's who sets those guidance and those rules for us. So that is not a local decision. They are supposed to be coming out with new rules in the coming weeks, but as they currently sit right now, students and staff will be wearing masks as we return in the fall.
Okay, so.
State, county.
State, yes, Department of Health for Washington State sets those guidelines for the school districts and many other. Yeah, that is not a board decision. That's not a superintendent decision. That comes from the state.
Not local, county.
No. Yeah.
The experts.
Okay, so moving along, thank you to everybody who attended and who commented this evening. Our next item on the agenda is a policy update. This is a policy review of the exact title, but take it away.
Yep, I got it. So we have a number of different policies from 1250 and 1250P student on governing boards, and then others. So we'll start there with the students on a governing board. This has been something that students have advocated for. I've done it in other districts as well. So putting forward a proposed policy tonight. But again, this is all first read, so feedback is highly welcomed, highly welcomed. So Michelle, Maria first, and then board.
Sure, this is a policy that many districts do have in the state. Many districts do have student representation on their boards. Some do have student advisory groups and not one or two student representatives. And I think that's kind of the intent of this, is that we want to widen that opportunity and not just have it be one or two students a year. So the policy is directly from WSD, and as I said, many districts have, a select group of one or two students a year, and our thinking was to give that opportunity, especially after hearing a student panel at a recent conference. We wanted, we had talked, some of us after that conference, to say, it's a real opportunity if we can have a larger group of students, rather than just like a junior and a senior in high school out of the size of our district that we have. So that's my comment.
One of the things that we talked about was, if you looked at the policy, it's a small group, but it's also actually an opportunity outside of leadership and ASB for students to become involved. It'll encompass 8 through 12 graders, so it's not just high school representation. So we thought this would be a great opportunity for students to become involved with a little bit of civic service.
Other board members?
Yes, I'd like to come in and I'll lead straight away. I would like to put a
Put us
pause
a little
on.
closer.
I would like to put a pause on this, not because I don't think it's a good idea, but because it needs and can be done a lot better. So there are two parts to this: is the policy and the procedure. The policy is a board matter. Procedure normally is an administrative matter. But in this particular case, the procedure is describing how the board does its business. So I consider that to be board matter, and that needs to be deliberated and thought through very carefully. So I do want to stress, I think what our custom and practice of the ASB people and occasional invitees is definitely not where we want to be. But where we want to be needs to have a lot of deliberation and a lot of thought. And when you talk to people about student representation, everything from actual elected board members to people showing up, it's very, very difficult to find a representative group of students and make it work well, because we don't have a system. So we have to think and struggle to do it and do it well. I think there'd be two sides to this. The superintendent of any district can form the superintendent's own student panel. I think that's a great thing. Possibly the superintendent student panel could come to present to the board. But once we get into deliberating, as opposed to just collecting input, then we need to think a little bit carefully about it. It's really a constitutional matter of how you would have dialogue at a board level. That's the way I feel about it. I personally have not participated in any formal discussion and deliberation of this. So that's why I said I believe that it's far too shallow for us here in 5 minutes at a first reading to come to a conclusion. I think it would be much more appropriate to have a deeper set of meetings, possibly something more like a workshop. What we have is inadequate. We need to do something better. Let's do the discovery for that something better in a more thoughtful, considered process. That's why I would prefer to put a pause on this. We could put the policy in as it was the policy, but the procedure and the way we do it, that needs a lot more work. That's my thing.
Martin, can I ask you, in terms of the procedure, what is missing that you would like to see?
First and foremost, no deliberation, no discussion, no variety of ideas. And secondly, it's the superintendent's, the way it's written, it is a superintendent appointed group with no knowledge from the board as to how that selection representative process is done. I'm not saying it wouldn't do well, and it definitely, I think, would be better than what we've got, but we need to go to not just better than what we've got. We need to go to something that is long-term good.
I 100% agree with Martin's comments on this. I think it's a little premature to bring this up for approval at this point. I would like some more board level discussion. I also 100% agree that our system of having an ASB rep just telling us, giving us little updates is not engaging for the students. And so we've heard from the students that they would like to be represented more, and I welcome that. But this seems a little just too quick, doesn't give me much information, what their role will be, how the selection works, what the responsibilities are. The procedure is helpful, but I think it's something that the board needs to discuss about what we expect, and vice versa. Like I said, this is a conversation. What do the students want out of this experience? What is their expectation in this? Because we've heard what they think their expectation is, but really putting it down to what do both sides need. So I think this requires a little bit more thought than what is currently presented.
I agree
Just-
with Julie and Martin. I'm in favor of having student representation on the board. It's something that we've heard about, we've seen from afar in other districts. I would like to know more about how other districts are managing it and how it's going. Some more discussion in a workshop format, perhaps, about what the models are, what the pros and cons are of the various models. I agree that this is a great idea, but without any board level discussion that showed up on the agenda, and I think we just need to take a little step back and take some more time to have it maybe as a workshop agenda where we have some background information and we can really dive into the issue, because it does change the dynamic of the board, and we want to do that thoughtfully.
Just for clarification, we don't approve all procedures.
No, and
So
tonight's not
we would not
approval,
be approving of.
so we gotta
procedure.
back it all the way up. This is
Yeah.
first read.
Exactly, this is first read.
So perfect time to push it back. That's exactly what the board should be doing. And if they're not comfortable, this is where we push it back to. So we can move the policy forward and then just keep looking at the procedure that the board wants for the process.
Paul, I wonder if you could reflect on some experiences that you've had with student representation on boards at other places where you've been, because it sounded like you've had some of those experiences. Again, our board has not had a student board representative, which is very different than having an ASB
Yeah.
student show up. They're two different things. So if you could just give us some background and
Yeah.
give our.
Absolutely. Quickly, first and foremost, they're non-voting. They're non-voting members. They give you feedback, they give you input. So that's one of the most important things. They're non-voting members of any school board. But one of the things that I've seen and that we've heard about at different conferences, you have to really support the students to make sure that they're able to engage in the conversation and that they're just not there to be there, because that too is disrespectful of the students' time. So what I've seen is when it's in a team environment with other students, so they can really talk through the board agenda, those different aspects. But you have to facilitate that. That doesn't just happen. But there's many different models, and we can set it up for sometime in August to come back, and the board can kind of come up with what they would like to see.
Yeah, one of the items that I'm reading here is in the policy that the student representative is to serve as a liaison to the associated student body, but what I just heard in the dialogue is that this is separate from associated student body representatives are elected by their peers. And so if we are disregarding the election by their peers and then inserting a student who hasn't been selected in that manner, it seems like a disconnect to me that needs to be further discussed and examined.
So we can bring that back in August and September.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're going to pull the whole policy and procedure. Because
That's up to the board,
I would like
you-
to pull both.
both.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because I think there's some committal language in the policy that makes me uncomfortable without further discussion as well.
okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, I would like to pull both too, and actually, Julie, you said something that added a whole new dimension that I hadn't thought of. In trying to work out, I said, a better way, finding out more from a diverse group, or a representative group of all kinds of students, and what students are looking for, that's a missing element that we don't have in, as far as financial is concerned. So that would be another reason for pulling back and looking into it and working out how to do it. So it works both from the board's point of view, because I do feel that non-voting doesn't really matter, but when somebody is sharing the podium with the board in discussion, that's a constitutional matter. And I think that we need to think carefully as to how that would work. That's a little different from canvassing a one-way opinion. And so there are a lot of issues, but it's great. We absolutely need it. We have been beaten up quite correctly for not listening and having enough student participation. On that, in principle, I totally agree. And let's go about it right.
Yeah, I almost feel like the superintendent student advisory council and the student representative on the board are two separate things.
Could be.
Which I wrote today to the board. One of those pieces that I really want is a student advisory council. But that, as I said to the board, that would be totally separate. This is one avenue, and the board will bring it back in August or September, and the board can talk further about that one. So we'll pull both. Next one is pesticide notification. It is literally word for word what WSD has, so don't know if anybody wants to talk about that.
It's a basic update.
Yeah, it is a basic update. The student discipline one was just cleaning up and making sure it met all the legal definitions, upcoming laws, and other things along those lines as well. Again, aligned to the WSD policy, to legislation throughout that as well. I'm not sure if Maria or Michelle, if you wanted to comment on that. But it's more just clean up.
I believe there's been legislation that gets rid of the zero tolerance policy, correct?
Correct.
And so the point is to try to keep students in school as much as possible, so we're not having huge attendance issues after maybe more minor infractions and such, but yeah. I don't recall the legislative piece. It was 5,000 or something
Yeah.
that got passed this year. I don't know if it's in that.
Anything else on that one?
No.
Next one's just, it's the disposal of surplus equipment and material. Again, clean up from policies from legislative and WSD.
And there was also a cleanup of policy 1420 proposed agenda and consent agenda.
Oh, did I skip that one? Thank you.
Yeah.
So that is what is on for first read. Hearing no objections to the others will move forward to the next board meeting in August, and we'll pull the student board representation.
Okay.
Okay, so those will be on the consent agenda at the August. Yeah. I guess we're getting a little break here, August 10th. All right, now we have a special presentation. Jeanette, we're going to be talking about the 2021-22 budget.
Okay. It sounds like it's not at the same time. Caleb, can you co-host me?
Co-host.
Co-host. Okay, we are back to go through a little bit more of the budget. So again, 21-22 budget also includes a 4-year budget as well. Just a reminder, budget is really a value statement, and so we are working through that process of really making sure that we're aligning our budget with our values. It's quite a lengthy process and pretty all-inclusive, and so by no means are we there yet, but we are actively working towards it. So in the budget timeline, we're kind of halfway through, and then all at the same time, I feel like I'm just starting. It's a very long process, but today, again, we're looking at the general fund updates, also a 4-year budget projection, and then also looking at the other funds that are included in the budget that we haven't looked at yet. Target dates left to go, July 12th is when it's due to the ESD and also available in draft format for the public. And July 27th is our special board meeting where we will be having our budget public hearing. And then August 10th is the budget presentation. I'll go over any final changes that came up since since the budget hearing. And then we will be approving the budget at that board meeting as well. Okay, so just a reminder of all the funds. So the general fund, actually we're going to work from the bottom up. So transportation vehicle fund is for the purchase and repair of pupil transportation equipment, basically the yellow buses that drive around. Capital projects fund, it's the fund that we use for property acquisition or any acquisition, construction, major projects, things like that. Debt service fund, that is the fund that the taxes to pay the bonds go into, and then the bond payments go out of that fund. ASB, so Associated Student Body, essentially it goes to support non-curricular, cultural, athletic, recreational, and social events and things for students. Acronym we use is CARS, all to benefit students. And then general fund is essentially everything else. And so that's the main operating fund for the district. So that's the fund we focus on the most. So that'll be the first one we go through, and then we'll go through the rest at the very end. So revenues in the general fund. Again, just a reminder of our enrollment assumptions. So we, rolled all the students up, looked at a cohort survival analysis, birth rates, chemicals prep enrollment, estimates of expansion in CTE for technical offerings at almost every school that CTE is offered at. And then also just looking at, pandemic impacts and looking at WIA long term. So I know these are very small, and I apologize, but it's a lot to put on here. So bottom line, total enrollment, we are looking at a decline each year. And so from the current year to what I'm projecting for next school year, we will be down roughly 150 students total. That is a pretty consistent trend for the next 3 years based on these projections. And then in 24-25, that actually ticks up a little bit to 215 roughly decline. So definitely not in a situation where it looks like our enrollment will be increasing, but following a pandemic and the big decline of enrollment we saw coming into the school year, I guess we will see what happens in the fall. Also, just a reminder on the revenue side of it. So the state revenues, we are getting a reduction each year in regionalization. So that 1% reduction is all the way through this 4-year projection. So we're not quite out of it. We're almost out of it in our 4 years. Also, the levy, looking at the voter approved tax amounts that we had in our recent election. So those are used in the budget. Also, the COVID funding, so including budget for that as well. That includes our regular normal CARES funds, and then also.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It seems like we have a question from the board.
Sorry, I wanted to wait till you finish your thought.
No worries.
Can you just real quickly clarify on your projections of enrollment? Does that take into account the study that we did related to the bonding and whatnot with the projected the 450 developments and things like
Correct.
that? Okay.
Correct, yeah. The Davis
Yeah.
study, yes.
So again, that COVID funding has just the regular CARES funding, and then also there's some special ed funding that's going to be coming through, some McKinney-Vento student funding, and then FEMA funding as well. So I just wanted to make sure we're, kind of capturing all of as much as possible. It's all reimbursement based, so if we don't spend it, we don't get it. Also, obviously, if there's any grants that don't have any projections available, then we just use the prior year. Also, our 21st century grants, again, so in 21-22, in these projections, the Lincoln and Lewis and Clark and Newberry grants are all set to expire, so that's built into the assumptions. And then Pioneer, Orchard, Mission View, and Columbia expire the following school year, 22-23, and that's built in as well. Just kind of an overview of the CARES funding so far. The CARES 2 seems like a long time ago, but the CARES 2, that's kind of roughly listed there what we are planning on spending it on. Also CARES 3, that's a recent one that the grant actually just became available in the last couple of weeks. Special ed funding, we're waiting on that. There's grants available through SPI. Again, there's other CARES funds as well. And then FEMA, we are applying for FEMA funding as we have eligible expenses. So this is just a side-by-side of last year's budget and this year's projected budget in revenue category. And so you'll see, obviously, in the 6,000 line, the federal special purpose, that's where those CARES funds are. And that is $20 million. So that's why that looks like a big jump, because it is. And then also in the 3,000, the state general purpose, that decline from 73 million in the budget last year to 68 million this year. Again, that's just due to that enrollment decline. That 68 is actually closer to what we have right now after our enrollment. So this is a comparison of the 5 years, essentially, the revenues, just so you guys can kind of see overall what what the trend is taking out those CARES funds, because really if we want to look at like, apples to apples, I feel like those need to be, taken out so they don't kind of skew the picture. So again, that decline, and then that slight uptick in the 24-25 school year. So. Before we move on to staffing, is any other questions on the revenue side?
Yes, Jeanette. In terms of the 21st century grants, you're assuming the grant money goes away, but we fund the programs, or you're taking the programs away as well in your assumption? I hadn't thought to ask that question before.
That would be also taking the programs
So
away. So that
those
there's apples
budgets
to
have no
apples.
after school for those schools.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that would, just so that we're comparing apples to apples. And we're not looking at, an assumption that we haven't made yet.
Yeah, I would have serious concerns about that from a planning point of view.
So Jeanette, I have a quick question. So you're saying there's a slight uptick for 24-25, and when I'm widening my screen to see that, I've not seen the uptick. So show me where it is, and why are we having the uptick? Is that birth rates or?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it. Help me to see the uptick.
Yeah, definitely. So that year, actually, the birth rates are a little bit higher. And we actually have a smaller graduating class that's leaving versus the incoming kindergarten class. So it's just kind of a timing thing.
But I'm not seeing, in your enrollment projections, please help me understand that as well, because I'm seeing a decrease from 23 to 24 of 213 students.
Yeah, I didn't see any increase in the enrollment, so I was just, I thought I was missing something,
Yeah.
so.
Coupled with taking away the internet academy in those years.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that and get back to the board. I didn't have a full breakdown of the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Make sure I didn't write down a note about that before I get too far. Okay, so moving on to staffing. So this is just a snapshot of the 2021 budget, the projected 21-22 budget, and then the 3 following years. So those are essentially the same numbers that you guys saw in the previous budget presentation. I think certified went down just slightly. I think by about one FTE or so. Also, in the bottom is what an FTE means, because it's a little bit confusing. So FTE essentially stands for full-time equivalent, and a certified FTE is essentially a teacher that works all day, 180 days, a 1 FTE. In the terms of admin or classified staff, 1 FTE is actually 8 hours a day, 260 days a year. And so just 2 different ways to calculate it. That's how it's calculated at the state. And so that's how we calculate it as well. So it's not necessarily bodies, it's really generated based on hours and work days.
Can I ask a question? Going back to your, the funding driven model, making sure I'm understanding this correctly, because how I'm reading this is it's based on number of students that determines the number of teachers, and I thought we talked about going away from that for equity versus, so the teacher staffing allocation would be based on needs in the classroom, not just raw student counts. Am I backwards on that?
No, so, we've talked about a few different things. So one of the things I think you're thinking of is the intervention model, and the funding for the intervention model, which is generated based on student count, but it's also based on building needs. So higher poverty building has access to more funds and, things like that. And so they get more staff hours assigned to them. So I think that's what you're talking about. And we've phased in that model this year, following a pandemic, we're, kind of phasing things in a little slower than we might normally. But next year we will be looking at actual staff allocation models that would look at various things. Student enrollment is one of those things.
Yeah. That's where we're heading to, Julie.
Okay,
Is where exactly what you said, that we base it off of the number of students, not what with in the past been just allocated to. What are the students in each building, and then how do we do that? So it'll be a weighted model in the years to come.
Okay, so I understood we were going to, and I didn't quite.
Yeah.
read it that way when I saw this, so.
Yep, no, you remember.
Yep. We're on the road to that. Actually, I'm gonna go back real quick. So you guys will see in the out years 22 and 23 and beyond, that reduction in staffing. Again, our enrollment is decreasing, so our staffing will be decreasing as well, in order to sustain that. So this is kind of what Julie was talking about. So starting next school year, our staffing will be a lot more aligned with what our student needs are across the system. And that, that model is going to be developed, and it will, for the most part, be launched around winter time. That's really when we start talking about staffing for the next school year.
One of the big pieces that we didn't talk a whole lot about in the student enrollment is there's a huge amount of unknown still. When we walk into September, I think we're gonna have a much better understanding, especially around the kinders, who's coming back. How many are coming back from that kinder level? I think we feel pretty good about all the other grade levels for the most part, but I think that kinder one is a huge unknown within our system, as we talked about at the last workshop. Currently, our community still is in the habit of enrolling kinders early. They generally happen in mid to late August. So those numbers, Jeanette and the team have been super conservative on those numbers. So we will see, I think, as we continue to report out in that September, October timeframe, what's the reality on the street or in the classroom, I should say.
Was there a smaller class size for kinders this year? Did people keep their kinders out?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we can expect somewhat of a normal or above normal, assumptions, right?
Assumption. That's our assumption. We just don't know how large that number is going to be. So that's an important number for us to really be looking at. That will also obviously impact budgeting and revenue coming in. So,
Yeah, I think one of the other important things to remember is people can either register their kindergarten age child for kindergarten or first grade. And so those who maybe homeschool their kid for kindergarten can enroll in first grade. So we're unsure, are we gonna have a high kinder or are we gonna have a high first grade, or are they both gonna be high? So that's something we're gonna be watching in August for some late hires.
That's what I was gonna say too, is I know a lot of folks that kept their kinders out because kinders could go full-time without, in person at a lot of places, but then their intent is to come back in first grade.
Yeah.
Versus just holding them out of kindergarten for 1 year. So.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on that, because I asked this question last time, because you're saying it's conservative, which is true. There's nothing in the current base assumptions of any returning first graders or kindergartens from people who abnormally took their children out of school this year. So that could be a surprise increase.
yes.
The present version of the budget assumes those people have gone away forever. Is that
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. another fall with a big giant question mark. But it'll be here really soon and we'll have our answers. So rolling all that staffing and other things up into the total expenses. So again, a side by side of the prior budget and then the first year of the 4-year budget, so next school year. So looking at certified salaries, classified salaries, and benefits, you know, those numbers are obviously higher, or staffing is higher, so those are asked to be expected. And then the MSOC, which is essentially all the other costs, so supplies, travel, services, all of that. That is up quite a bit as well, but that is due to CARES funding. So that's where those expenses live. I wanted to try to keep them out of staffing as much as possible, just because staffing is one of those things that we look at year over year over year. So I wanted those to be as clean as possible. So the CARES funding in the budget is 16.75 million. And yes, it is lower than the revenue. We do receive an indirect on our direct expenses for that. Then also a transfer out of $500,000 to capital projects to get us kickstarted on a project that we need to start on.
Jeanette, is there, you have here that CARES funds are not accounted for in staffing. Is there restrictions to the CARE funds?
Yes, there's restrictions. It's not that staffing cannot be paid for out of the funds. It's just that, you know, they're one-time dollars. So we aren't going to be hiring like continuing teachers or continuing classified staff with those funding sources. We'll be using those funding sources for other things. And it might be staffing, but just not continuing. Again, a 4-year look. And again, this excludes the CARES funds. So we're taking out that, you know, skewing effect. So again, based on the assumption that we will be reducing staff, those expenses are projected to decrease. So decreasing revenue, decreasing staffing, decreasing enrollment, decreasing expenses.
Could you comment on the 21-22 for this next year, why we have that significant bump up in expenses? Just what's contributing to that?
The majority of that is the staffing, our increased staffing that you guys saw on the other slide, and then also the $500,000 transferring out to capital projects.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, and roll all of that not so good news up. So at the last meeting, the board asked to see the fund balance broken up into the different buckets, essentially. So the first bucket is restricted for carryover. So that's where the carryover of our grant funds live, essentially. So if we don't spend the money that we receive, we have to carry that over and spend it in the next school year. Same with the skills center. So the skills center is, or technical skills center, the tech center at Old Station, that is basically its own cost center. And so any funds that it's generated in excess of its expenditures over its life follow it. So that's what that is. Inventory and non-spendable items, that's just an estimate. So essentially any food inventory or prepaid items that we incur. Assigned to other purposes, donations we receive, admin match, other miscellaneous things that are intended for specific purposes that we have to carry over legally. That's where that lives. Jumping down to the bottom one, the 891, that is the minimum fund balance policy of 5%, policy 6022. That is estimated based on what I estimate the 2021 expenditures to be. And then the last bucket is the unassigned, which is about 3.9 million to start with. So total beginning fund balance at about almost 10%, 11.5 million. And then at the end of the next school year, the projections are in that carryover bucket about $200,000. The technical skills center about 550,000. No change in the inventory assigned to other purposes, donations and things about 200,000. Minimum fund balance policy, 5% of the 21-22 expenses was about 6.9 million. And that would leave the unassigned balance at only 812,000. Total fund balance of almost 8.7 million, which is at about 6.3% roughly. I apologize, that was a lot of numbers.
Just as a caveat to the last conversation we just had, everything from here on out is all predicated off of student enrollment. So that's why those September numbers are going to be so important to the school district, because you'll see the 4-year, but everything builds off of however many students we have, in the fall. But again, and I appreciate what Jeanette did and Martin's question. We're very conservative on who we think based on our current numbers, because that's what we have to budget off of. But we have an anticipation there may be more, but just as a reminder.
Okay, rolling up to the 5-year or 4-year summary. So beginning fund balances, revenue summary, expense summary, and ending balance summary. And the middle there is that percentage of expenses, and that's total fund balance. So you'll see in 23-24 school year, we are projected to, again, based on all these assumptions, we would be projected to go beneath the 5% fund balance policy. And so, again, that just, really, drives it home that, we're going to need to look at staffing and, definitely analyze enrollment and, really look at what we're spending our money on. Also, for context, there is that total enrollment for the year, projections, the projected staffing, and all of that. Obviously, I guess probably not obviously, but in 22-23 school year and beyond, those are just kind of some estimates of what we would kind of be looking at for staff reductions. They're not any means actuals or anything that we've discussed necessarily internally. It's just some projections to show we will be decreasing staffing over time.
Can I make a comment to this? Because I have actually something that I think is severely in need of a change. I realize that enrollments are forecast and a lot of other things that are forecast. It is essential that we do not go below our minimum balance. It is a bonding issue and it is a planning issue. So if you plan conservatively on enrollment, then you need to plan commensurately in your expenses to protect your minimum balance. I did a guesstimate on that 4-year projection, and it would seem to me that at the minimum, you need to look at your assumptions of how the school district would run. And I realize things that will change, but I think it's important in any model and any plan. A budget is a plan. It's not a bunch of numbers, that you have the left hand and the right hand in sync. And I guesstimated that we're at least 2.1 million short in terms of reducing expenditures for the level of enrollment to maintain our minimum balance. So I would strongly recommend that the district goes back and produces a plan that balances expenses and revenues to maintain the required minimum balance.
And that's what that's that work that we've been talking about, making it ensuring that we are matching the student enrollment to the funding and not continuing to having the same funding each year, but really the dollars follow each of the students. So that will be the basis of that. So we plan to have that to the board in that late fall of next year. So you have that, but I absolutely appreciate what you're saying, and we'll make that adjustment for the final version of the budget, for the budget presentation.
No, I appreciate it. I just want to clarify that I don't think it's faking the numbers.
No.
I think we know that we have to maintain that fiscal discipline.
Yeah, I totally concur.
And that's a pretty low bar, actually. Our previous CFO actually recommended that maybe we have a range of 6 to 8%, which personally makes me feel a little more comfortable, but so yeah, I agree with Martin, you know, having that 5% projected ending balance for those last 2 years on here, I think need to kind of be in place. So we're not shaking in our boots as board members, so.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
I'd echo that too. A lot of the agencies I work with have to maintain a 7% fund balance, and if we're projecting anything lower than what our minimum is, and that's just not good fiscal responsibility. And especially if we're even thinking about entering a bond in the next year or two, and we should be projecting upwards of anywhere.
I 100% agree with that. That 5% is meant to be the threshold below which we do not go. It's not meant to be our target.
I'll say something, I guess. No, I agree. 6 to 8% would be definitely, this 4,420,000, that's a scary number. That's a really scary number. What would put that, where would we be percentage-wise with that fund balance? You know? I mean, probably around 4%, below 5.
So with the 4.4,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it would be 3.87.
I think it's actually less because I assumed in my back of the envelope that you have about $1 million of carryover like you do this year as a phase 2. So not all of that balance is going to qualify for the minimum reserve unless you've done your budgeting differently.
So the projected, so you're projecting that our 21-22 beginning balance is going to be more than 11.5? I guess I'm not sure what your question is.
You in the future years, you haven't broken out the different elements of the balance. Not all of those elements will qualify for the minimum fund reserve. That's what I'm saying.
I see what
Yeah,
you're
so
saying.
therefore it's going to be less than 4% depending on what are the carryovers.
Yeah, okay. I think I see what you're saying. Any further questions from the board? Okay, we're going to move on to the other funds. Associated student body, again, this is all based on students. The student bodies actually approve their own budgets, and they work together with their clubs and classes and various components to develop those budgets and approve them. So in 21-22, those are the budgets that they approve. Currently, we do not have them projecting out for years. That could be a good next step for them. And, you know, especially with the fee reduction program that started, that definitely impacts their budgets and their bottom lines. So that definitely is something that we are probably going to be starting to look into in the next year as well. debt service fund, like I said before, the taxes received for the bond issues go into this fund. That's the taxes and the revenues. And then the expenditures are again those bond and interest payments, and then the bond fees that we are required to pay. Capital Projects Fund. Right now, we are winding down some of our projects over the summer using the leftover state match funds. And so it's, you know, really around, we have a Sunny Slope portable going in to house students, also building security projects that are wrapping up. We also will be doing some network infrastructure projects that are also partially funded by the CARES funds and E-rate, which is a federal, it's another federal funding source that helps support technology and infrastructure things. So we're getting funding from that. And so you guys will see the transfer in from the general fund up in the revenues, the $500,000. The project that we need to accomplish over the next year, maybe it might go into the following school year as well, we'll see. We're estimating that to be, you know, we're hoping right around $5 million. So that's what that is, that facilities line item. And also about 300,000 in contingency, just in case one of our projects doesn't come in on estimate. Any questions on the capital projects fund?
Are you able to describe what the facilities are? And I noticed the other change is you've got short-term funding debt for that. So those are two differences from prior versions. And you know, if there's still contingency, we would like to know more about it as soon as possible. But if you're able to describe them more concretely, please do.
Yeah, so the facility is an athletic facility or a softball complex. So we are exploring the option of or what it would take to build a softball complex on our own campus or on our own property. And so that is what that project is. And the short-term loan or other funding source, you know, it's at this point yet to be determined. But essentially the 4.5 is just the balance of the $5 million and the $500,000 transfer. And so we would need cash up front to fund that project. And so we would either need to go out for a short-term loan and then pay that off over time, or look at other funding options.
I haven't been involved in any school district short-term loans before. When was the last time that we did one of these? And typically, how do you do it? And then how do you eventually pay them off?
So I don't know the last time the district did one because I just got here. But I've worked with other districts that have done short-term loans. And so it kind of depends on how you want to pay it back. Some districts, if they have a future bond proposal, they can wrap it up into that. Most of the time districts pay it off over time from their general fund.
So it'd be an interfund loan.
It would not necessarily be an interfund loan, it would be a transfer. So you would be transferring those funds from one fund to the other without expectation that they would be transferred back. You could do an interfund loan if you knew of a future funding source going into capital projects that could pay that loan off, but at this time we don't have that.
Now I'm really confused.
You thought you had it.
Where are we proposing to transfer this $4.5 million from?
So it would, essentially the way it would work is the district would go out, if we're going down the short-term loan option, the district.
I believe, in our almost 20-year history that the district has never done, so this is all new.
Okay, so the way it would work is we would go out to a bank. There's various places that offer short-term loans to school districts or long-term loans even. And so we would go out and essentially ask for a loan from a bank. It's very similar process, well, a little bit lengthier, probably similar actually to a mortgage. So you go out and get the loan, you get the cash up front to complete your project. And then over the term of your loan, so 10 years or 20 years or however long that loan is, you make annual or monthly, whatever you determine in your contract, payments from the general fund to pay that loan off.
And is the amortization of that loan in the 4-year projection of the general fund cash flow?
It is not.
So shouldn't it be? In one form or another?
I could take a stab at what that might look like. It would just
And
all
I'm just
be up in the
thinking
air.
again, of fiscal discipline. See, we're
Right.
showing an intention which may not happen,
Mhm.
but it is an obligation. And we're not showing the financial consequences of that obligation if we execute it.
And this is this is to fulfill our Title IX obligation, right?
Correct.
Correct.
So can we not go for some kind of a short-term capital levy to fulfill that obligation with public support?
We can do a number of different pieces. I think the most important piece is understanding that we're going to have roughly a $5 million obligation on our books. If it's through a loan, it's through a bond, it's through fund balance. Ultimately, our facilities, our softball facility must be upgraded to meet the boys. And this is an area we have to address.
I'm not gonna argue about that, but what I am going to throw caution out about is, this is a precedent for our district as far as I know. And I just want us to be very, very careful about approaching funding public projects by getting private loans, basically.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I put other funding sources, because that's just kind of, up in the air at this point. That's obviously a big board discussion. We would not take any action
No.
without the board approval and board input on how we want to fund that project, kind of once we know what the actual cost is projected to be. It could be through a levy. Levies are typically collected over time. You don't see typically a 1-year levy. And taxes are collected over time. And so when you're looking at a capital project, you have a contractor that sends you a bill and you have to pay that bill right then. So you need some kind of cash source in order to meet your contractual obligations. So it's kind of a big, ugly, tangled mess, but there are options.
If we had a capital levy, I can see, paying back our own fund, from the capital levy approved by the voters, but I can't see. Personally, this is me talking not on behalf of the board, but I can't see us going out and getting a private loan and paying back taxpayer dollars for that purpose.
And I would just say to the board, for right now, it is literally a placeholder. It is a placeholder. We don't know the cost. We don't know the amount. The board tonight approved the contract for the architect to look at the land, look at the pieces. So right now it's a number, it's a placeholder. And it will definitely be back to the board before any decision is ever made about how to fund. It will be the board's decision. So it's a placeholder. We're guesstimating, is it 5 million? I don't know. It could be more, it could be less. So that's in the coming weeks. That's what we'll have, is a much better understanding of the financial obligation. And then I'll come back to the board to say, how are we going to pay for that going forward?
Is there any possibility that there's any type of state matching funds for a project like that, because of this is for Title IX funding? Is there any?
Not to my knowledge, especially because it's athletics, which is outside of, the K-12 education system funding.
To me, it's a big footnote, contingent liability. Maybe we don't know where it is and how to do it, but any complete set of balance sheet financials should disclose that liability in big print. I mean, I don't dispute at all the planning and the need to do it. I know, I spoke about it too, but I think that we need to disclose it, disclosure.
Okay, moving on to the last fund. Transportation Vehicle Fund, also known as the Yellow Bus Fund. Not too many changes in this fund. The only, big change on the revenue side is the Department of Ecology grant. This current school year is the last year that we are eligible for the current grant that we have. There might be another grant that we can go after, but at this time, we are not aware of any of that, and we have not been awarded anything. So that is zeroed out starting next school year. And then on the expenditure side, projections around 300 to 350,000. That gets you, depending on the year and depending on the bus, 2 to 3 buses each year, which is what we've been planning on in the previous budget discussions from last year as well. And right now we are able to sustain that without any transfer to a general fund. As you guys see in the 24-25 school year, the ending balance is about 111,000. And so, right around that time, we might need to look at transfers from general fund, but that's outside of that 4-year projection.
I know we've had a lot of, we've kind of started this process of replacing our buses in the last few years. So when will we be in a good position with our transportation department and our buses? That's my big question.
Yeah. So it's definitely a long process. I would have to look at our depreciation a little bit more deeply to see kind of where we're at with that, because the gist of it is you need to keep buying buses to keep the state money coming in to buy more buses. And so really keeping that at a steady level of 2 to 3 buses or 1 to 2 buses, whatever's best for your district, is what keeps that money coming in. It's not based on how much you drive your buses, how many routes you have, or anything like that. It really is based on what buses do you buy, how long do they depreciate, how much do they cost, all of that. Okay, any other questions?
So what we'll bring back to the board, Martin's response to looking at the staffing again, making sure that the expenses and revenues, and what I heard from the board is more closer to the 6% than even the 5%. So we'll have that for that July 27th hearing date. We'll also, there was one other piece and it just left my head. I know those were the biggest ones.
I have a
Sorry.
I think it was the one.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I think we just talked about it. Short-term memory.
Yep, the loan.
Yeah, so we'll have both of those pieces for the board for that next update.
Okay.
Jeanette, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette. I know that's a lot of work and it's hard to be grilled by the board on the spot. So kudos for handling that well and appreciate your comments.
Part of the job.
Yep. Well done. And it's good for questions. They're great.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we have board communication. Are there any communications board members have that they'd like to share with the rest of the board?
I just want to step in and thank Jeanette and everybody for the budget presentation, for the work. And yes, you were grilled, that's our job. But thank you very much.
I'd like to echo that. Thank you, Jeanette, and all of the team for all that hard work. I just wanted to put on the board's radar that WSD is looking at candidates for this fall for the state election for WSD officers. So that should be coming down the pike. That process kind of happens over the summer. They're trying to see if they're going to have the elections potentially a little earlier than the state conference in November. They might try to do it a little bit earlier than that. So that's still kind of up in the air, but I just wanted to put that on everybody's radar.
Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else? Okay, superintendent report.
I know Terry had left, but I would highly encourage anybody to really watch yesterday's board workshop. I think there is a lot more depth and complexity that the board, myself, and Diana Haglund went through. So I would highly encourage it. It was a great workshop that really talked about the work that happening inside the classrooms, work happening at the school leadership level and at the district office. So highly encourage that. We have, for the most part, July off. We will be from the board, not administration. We will be back in August for the next board meeting.
Great. So looking at the calendar, since we do have July off, I do have you and I meeting in July. And the last budget meeting on the 27th
Correct.
of July. Actually, budget approval on the 10th. So our next actual meeting is the 27th and then on the 10th. And then I have next agenda planning meeting on the 2nd of August with Martin. Okay. Great, meeting adjourned.